Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan, and I thought I would try my hand today at one of these Bat-Chat adventures that Steve Baxi has been doing. He's done a couple of these now, and they're absolutely fantastic. These kind of off-the-cuff, stream of consciousness, talk about a cool Batman topic just as you think of it. And these would be great, of course, for conversation videos, and Steve was doing those while I was off the channel, and he was gracious enough to keep Bat-Chat going, and I wouldn't have thought that Bat-Chat would be a thing that would really work with one person, and of course, this is sort of a different thing in that it's not commentaries, it's just one person talking about a Batman topic, and again, these would be really cool, maybe even eventually to revisit some of these as conversations, and for some of them to just be conversations in the first place, and Steve and I have had conversations about doing some of these together as conversations, but I was a little jealous of him. I thought it looked like a lot of fun, and I thought I would try my hand at it as well, so I pitched this one to Steve, and he thought it was a cool idea, so I thought I'd make a video about it. Today I'm going to talk about Batman as an urban legend, and whether or not it makes sense in today's day and age, and whether or not it ever made any sense. Can you be Batman and make people believe that you are some sort of supernatural force, or that you're not really a man, that you're some sort of wraith, that you're maybe the universe sending something mysterious and primal after the bad guys? Or would people, especially in this day and age, immediately pick up on the fact that, no, you have to be a man, and we live in a day and age where it is easier than it ever has been to do the sorts of things that Batman does if you have the resources? And wouldn't it be potentially easier for someone now to put two and two together, especially if Bruce Wayne was as famous as he is in a lot of Batman continuities, and if he had his hands in as many pies in Gotham, and if he was the first person you think of when you think rich person in Gotham City? If all those things are the same as they have been in Batman stories going all the way back, then wouldn't it be easier now for people to put that together? And I've always kind of thought this about Batman. I've always wondered if Batman could possibly, how long he could possibly operate as a non-public figure, and with people wondering if he really exists or not, and especially if that's possible now. I think it made more sense when he was created, and this is the case with a lot of these characters, that that we keep kind of extrapolating these stories and updating them, but we don't always update them as much as we think we are. Sometimes we keep a lot of the stuff the same that seems like a conceit that maybe was slightly less of a conceit, or slightly more believable for a lot of different reasons in 1939 than it would be now. The two big reasons that a lot of this stuff is easier to swallow at that time, you could point to, well, it's just comic book fiction, and so it's quicker to suspend disbelief, and you're, in 1939, you're looking at this as disposable stuff, you're not really taking it as seriously, you're not going to critically analyze it the way that we tend to now, and it was largely seen as kiddie fare, even though a lot of that stuff was pulp fiction and was dark and gritty and street level and that kind of thing. So there was a certain sort of realism that was there, but only in what it looked like and what it felt like, not necessarily as so much about whether or not some of these things were really possible. So there's certainly that element, but there's and I think probably the big important thing, which is people were certainly more naive and I don't know if gullible is the right word, but it would have been quicker for your mind to go to the supernatural and the primal in a day and age when you weren't inundated with this kind of genre fiction, and where anything that you can imagine seems to kind of have been put on film now that we have, our sensibilities have changed a lot over time. We see a lot, we're much more desensitized to violence now. We've gotten a little bit looser in our culture. Things are, a lot of things are a lot more okay, are a lot more appropriate than they would have been at that time. And, you know, I've heard stories of people as late as the 50s and 60s being in a movie theater, and there being people dressed up in costume that show up for some sort of event or something, be they like zombies or other sorts of monsters or something, and they walk into the theater and all the people in the theater freak out and think that they're actually being attacked by zombies. And we think, well, that sounds ridiculous. That couldn't... How could people be naive enough to think that that's really going on? But you don't think about the fact that if you're not... If you don't live in a society that is so plugged in and constantly, and I don't just mean the internet culture, even certainly, you know, 24-hour television and seeing a lot more movies and those sorts of things has certainly changed our perceptions and things. But I just think that by and large we are much more quick on the uptake as a society about those sorts of things than we would have been even 40 years ago. And so it would have been more believable even in real life for somebody like Batman to jump out of the shadows and to you know, stay mostly hidden and to be doing things that people wouldn't think someone would be capable of, and think that and wonder if it's really a man. And also it would be, I think, just practically simpler for a person outside of our information age, cell phone age, and even a lot of modern conveniences that we had again even 30-40 years ago. It would have been, you know, going back to turn of the century or even 30-40 years into the beginning of the 20th century, it would have been easier to believe that somebody could pull off the sorts of things that Batman does and not be seen, you know, be completely hidden. And it's obviously just, that's obviously just a much more difficult thing to pull off now. Batman has often been, and again, I think that we've made this a conceit now in a way that it at one time might have been thought of as a little bit more believable, that Batman could you know, dress up as a giant bat and use all this gadgetry and stuff and still manage to be thought of as this urban legend, and people wonder if he actually exists. The thing that never fit together for me, and no matter what era you're talking about, this is the thing that I don't buy. Like, I think that a Batman that isn't driving a Batmobile and isn't, I almost said branding people, like Batman v Superman, isn't using his bat symbol on things. He doesn't have any kind of a calling card. He's not labeling things. He's not, that's more of a 60s thing, but I mostly just mean that he's not branding. He's not like on skin, but like you know, making Batman a brand. If he's just trying to scare people with the bat thing, but then people don't believe him, and he's able to stay under the radar, and there's not, you know, satellites everywhere and stuff, then, you know, maybe you can kind of buy that. But in any sort of era, I never understood the idea that people aren't sure if Batman really exists, and he drives around in a fancy schmancy car. I was never able to put those things together, and I think a lot of that has to do with the merchandising side of creating a character like this, and of course the brand nature of Batman, the fact that all of his stuff looks really cool, and it's all got these really sleek looking bat symbols on it, and he is this super rich guy that can make any gadget and create any cool thing that he wants to. I think that is a lot of the big selling point of Batman, and these two things are very much in conflict all the way through Batman's history. So it's more of a real-world how you sell the character thing than it is a you know, a fictional character. Does this really make sense? A problem where he's not really... I think a lot of versions of Batman aren't doing the let's make it all a brand thing for any character reason at all. I think that we have over time, and it's important to note that characters like this, you know, we like to think of characters like Batman as being a particular kind of character. And we know certainly, at least subconsciously, that there are a whole lot of different versions of Batman, but people like to talk about the character like there's one, like he is this living, breathing, actual guy. And we forget that all these characters, especially the ones going back as far as Batman and Superman, and that have had so many runs and have always had a book out and have always been popular to some degree, or not, sometimes more and sometimes less, but certainly with characters like Batman and Superman, they've always had some sort of a following, even if they weren't the megastars they are now. It's not one person, it's always collaborative. It's always somebody adding on to what was done before with the character, and a lot of different people's takes, but at the end of the day, Batman is this collection of ideas that all stack onto each other, and sometimes certain things get dropped off the pile and other things get added back onto the pile. But I think that it's disingenuous and just kind of inaccurate to think of Batman as this one sort of psychology. There's a lot of different kinds of things that have gone into him. So when you look at later takes, and when I say later, I just mean after decades after his initial inception, you're looking at you've got people that will turn the Batman is using Batman as a brand thing into a character thing, but that's because they're trying to make it make sense. And you have this with all these kind of characters. You have people who take the Superman origin and they say, does it really make sense that a guy would send his baby in a rocket ship but not go himself with his wife? So then a thing that was created just as the initial idea to get the character going becomes a logical leap that needs to be filled in, and we really want to make that realistic and believable. And so we take a thing that was there as just a story functional, almost straight up conceit thing, and we get creative and we say, how can we actually make this make sense? And that's a lot of fun, and that's a thing that's done, I think, with Batman's gadgetry and his labeling and his branding, and even with the Batmobile. How can you make the Batmobile a thing that he could drive around in without people knowing that he's there and wondering if he's still really Batman, or really a person? Excuse me. But early on, certainly I think those things are there just because it looks cool, and there's certainly a lot of that in comics. And so realistically, I just don't think that it makes a lot of sense that Batman would ever be thought of, especially in this day and age, as an urban legend. I think early on, as long as he is just skulking in the shadows and he's leaping and stopping the bad guys and then running off. I think it's funny that you have, for instance, the '89 version, who is really flashy, and Burton did a pretty good job of kind of keeping him in the shadows, but he's got this really loud Batmobile, and people don't believe that he actually exists, and he's going around telling people, I want you to tell all your friends about me, I'm Batman. And I always wonder why Batman wants people to know that I guess the idea is that he's creating the urban legend. Is that it? The idea that, because obviously Batman in a lot of different versions, especially Nolan's, he's all about being a symbol, and so he wants to he wants to inspire people to be a certain way, or at the very least, he wants to inspire the underworld to be intimidated and to change their ways and what they're doing. And so, if he goes around and says, "I want you to tell everyone that I want you to tell everyone that there's this person named Batman," that even if a lot of people don't believe it, you have this looming fear that maybe there's this force out there and we don't know who he is. I think one of the reasons that it's hard to swallow the idea that Batman would really be as intimidating as he is and be able to pull all of that off, but especially that he would really be that intimidating, is just that we're used to him. It's difficult to imagine a world with a real Batman that doesn't have a fictional Batman. And I have the same thing with Superman, I have the same thing with Star Trek, I have this with a lot of things. Star Wars is easier because it takes place in a more fantasy kind of world that doesn't deal with Earth if there is an Earth, and so those sorts of things, it's much easier to you know, swallow the idea that in this universe there's not a thing called Star Wars that affected the culture. But when you look at Batman, it's hard to be completely intimidated by that costume because we're so familiar with it. Fans like me tend to decorate our house in it. We look at it all the time. It's a brand. It's a merchandising cash cow. We think of Batman as one of, if not the most recognizable character in culture. And how do you make a reader suspend disbelief to look at that costume and buy that anybody on the street sees it and says that might be supernatural, or that might be you know, that's the scariest thing I've ever seen, and it's primal, it's like something out of a nightmare. And I think that's a difficult thing to do now. Certainly I can suspend my disbelief and say, okay, I'm in a world that doesn't have Batman and hasn't affected things. But then one of the things that I think makes that difficult is just that Batman is so permeating in the culture that it's hard to imagine a world that isn't very different from ours that wouldn't have Batman in it. And so I think about these kinds of things, and they make me sometimes you know, have a hard time looking at myself or looking at that world as anything but kind of contrived. Where it's like, okay, everything turned out pretty much the same way. That's why I like a more stylized Batman universe, generally speaking, and I guess that works a little bit better when you have a really stylized universe like that. Maybe it's even harder with Marvel now, just because, you know, Marvel is supposed to be kind of a more realistic-looking universe. I have this sometimes with Superman, too, where you'll have Superman in a world. I had this with Watchmen, you know, where you'll have... although, now that I'm thinking about it, I think Watchmen might have had superheroes fictionally first. I forget. I had a whole thing about this years ago, and it's been a while since I've thought about it. But anyway, with regards to Superman, you know, you'll have Superman in a world that is permeated with fictional superheroes, and it's like, was he first and then the fictional superheroes came later, or, you know, how exactly does that work? And it's hard to imagine a world where Superman wasn't the first superhero that you know permeated this culture and created all of this. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The other thing that's weird about the Batman urban legend thing is just if Batman makes it too evident that he's a man, like, especially once he stops being an urban legend, people know that he's around, and he doesn't necessarily, like, make public appearances, but he'll sometimes show himself to groups of people, and people know about him, and especially when you get into something like Batman Inc., and Bruce Wayne is funding Batman, so we know for sure that there is Batman and that these two people know each other and that kind of thing. And you get that classic cliche superhero thing of the superhero who knows the secret identity and they're friends, but they never actually are seen in the same room together. I always think that it's even more of a leap that once he's kind of public and people know about him, that people wouldn't immediately look to Bruce Wayne. Because again, he's the guy, as I said at the beginning of the video, he's the guy who is the first person you think of when you think of really rich persons. So unless Batman, the thing that can make Bruce Wayne look like the last person Batman could possibly be is, well, a couple things. Is A, he's a playboy and doesn't seem altruistic and doesn't seem to really care anything about people at all, and is just out for himself and just wants to have fun and buy whatever he can get his hands on, and he's eccentric and he's out of touch. So that's a thing he can do to make that happen. But then if Batman is clearly a person with immense amounts of resources, doesn't that start to become a pretty obvious front? So what Batman really needs to do is stay in the shadows, not have a flashy car, not have this whole brand that he, you know, puts his bat symbol on things all the time, and he's just got to stay hidden, or you're gonna immediately know that. liked a lot of things about Morrison's Batman Incorporated, but I never bought the premise. I never bought Bruce Wayne is funding Batman and nobody immediately goes, oh, wait a minute, he's probably Batman. And then if he was ever found out, how would anybody be surprised? That's the thing, is that then the secret identity thing isn't fun anymore, because it's like, well, as soon as he's found, oh yes, of course, and we are all idiots for not having picked up on that. There's a point I meant to make earlier, and I think I accidentally talked over it, so let me go back to it for a second. This will be the last thing I say. But I was talking about Batman's psychology, and how he is sometimes will build in his, yeah, this is the point I was going to make. Sometimes will build in this this obsession with branding and labeling things into his eccentric psyche, and that he's really full of himself, and the question starts to become, is he doing this for him, or is he doing this for others? He says he is taking down criminals because he doesn't want any other little boy to go through what he went through, and he's trying to fundamentally change the way people think and the way people act, and maybe it's as much just he can't sit back and do nothing, so he does what he can without going over the edge, which is what he thinks would happen if he actually allowed himself to kill someone. And so he's straddling that fence between being a vigilante and being the bad guys that he's trying to take down. But the question is always, is it really that? And of course that has some potential mentally unstable stuff in it, unhinged stuff anyway. Is it really that, or is it that he is an egomaniac, and that he has to control everything, and he has to feel like he's in control? And again, the thing that keeps him from being any more in control, from being a fascist dictator, the Batman from Kingdom Come that uses robots and forces everyone into a police state and forces everybody to do basically whatever he wants them to. It is the only it's kind of the same thing as it is in the previous scenario of his psyche, which is just, well, there's a line he won't cross because he's afraid that'll happen, but the motivation could be less altruistic than even he realizes, even he thinks it is. And so might that be the reason that he's, that he puts the bat symbol on everything, and that he is kind of living large as Batman. He's got his really, tricked out bat cave, and nobody's going to see it except for any partners he might have, even though he often doesn't really want partners. It's just there for him, and he's made kind of a museum out of it. What is the point of that if he's the only person that's going to see it? And so doesn't he kind of live in his own world, and he's creating that world in Gotham, and so then that place revolves around him? And I think it's really interesting that you take something that, like I said earlier, is as simple as it's probably just there because it looks cool, because it makes for good toys and merchandise, and it makes the character more fun to read about than if he was just wearing a cape or just wearing, a cloak or something. That he's got this whole apparatus, and we make it this very complex part of his psychology. And that's one of my favorite things about Batman, and about some of these characters in general, is going back to these things that are there just because they're neat, and finding ways to draw the character and to have some social commentary and just make these people a lot more interesting through things that were not there for any other reason than they looked cool, in the first place. And so I guess my final thoughts: does Batman as an urban legend work now? I think it would be really hard. I think he would get found out. And I think that no matter how rich he is, I think the more rich he is, actually the easier it would maybe be for him to be found out with modern technology and that kind of thing. I think that if he were to stay as limited, as minimalistic as he could, that he might be able to use his wealth and his resources in ways that were that were less detectable. But once he starts flying around in a Batwing and all of that stuff, I think it becomes much harder for him to operate. And I think the best way Batman now, actually, come to think of it, maybe this could work. The best way Batman could work as an urban legend now would be to kind of work with, I don't know if more old school technology, but just less technology, less detectable stuff, and not be, you know, obviously as flashy, and not use state-of-the-art stuff that's easily trackable. Maybe he can make state-of-the-art stuff that's not trackable at all, and of course that's what he does sometimes, but I think he's got to kind of be invisible, and if he... And then, you know, an earlier Batman certainly can be an urban legend, but again, he's got to not have all that flashy stuff. What do you guys think? Leave your comments and let me know. I know this is kind of stream of consciousness and a little bit babbly, but I thought it would be fun to just sit down and start talking about this and see where it went. I would be very interested to see what you guys think, so like I said, leave your comments, and Steve and I will be back with more Batman the Animated Series commentaries soon. And if you liked this video, let me know, and I will consider doing more Bat Chat adventures like Steve Baxy's doing. I'm sure he'll want to do more of those too, and he and I will sometimes also talk together about a topic like this. I'll see you next time on Bat Chat. Another videos coming up on Geekvolution. I'm Captain Logan, and thanks again.